John makes two main statements. The first is this: what makes us Christian is the rebirth. We must be born again. John more or less assumes this. He says, whosoever believes that Jesus the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loves him that begot loves him also that is begotten of him. Now, says John, in effect, I am anxious to demonstrate to you this question of the importance of loving the brethren. And of course, it follows quite inevitably from the doctrine of the rebirth that you know all about. Whosoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loves him that begot loves him also that is begotten of him. 1 John chapter 5, verse 1, the New Testament definition of a Christian. The Puritans had a very interesting phrase that they often employed when they returned to a verse on which they had already preached. Their way of putting it was that they felt there were further gleanings that they could obtain from that particular crop. I think there is a very good way of referring to the abundant lessons that are to be found. So constantly in certain verses we encounter in working through a section or a portion of scripture. In our study of the previous chapter, we took this verse together with the three concluding verses of chapter 4. Indeed, we indicated that in these four verses together, the apostle is winding up his great argument with regard to love for the brethren. And there is no doubt at all that his main purpose in using the words we have there was to provide a very powerful argument, and that is to be deduced from the family relationship, in support of his contention that as Christians we should love one another. That was his main reason. But as I hinted, there is a great deal more in this verse than just that particular argument. And that leads me to make a statement that I believe is of great importance whenever we read the Bible. Invariably in Scripture, there is not only the immediate argument, but there is also something further suggested. Well, let me put it like this. Observe the tremendous assumption that John makes in using this particular argument with these people, the basis on which his argument rests. Or to put it another way, observe what he takes for granted in the understanding of these Christian people. That is what I want to consider here. He is taking it for granted that they are perfectly familiar with doctrine of regeneration and rebirth. And it is because he takes this for granted that he is able to draw that deduction. Thus, in arriving at that particular argument by referring to a family relationship, John incidentally is stating this profound doctrine of regeneration. This is characteristic of these New Testament apostles. They assume the acceptance of certain fundamental doctrines on the part of the people, so that there is a sense in which we can say that we simply cannot follow their detailed argument unless we start by accepting the basic doctrine on which everything is founded. So, once more we find John apparently repeating himself. he has already dealt with this idea of being born again, being born of God several times, and yet he returns to it. But in actual practice, he is not repeating himself. He always has some particular shade of meaning, something fresh to present, some new aspect of the matter. And as we look at this verse, we shall find that he is doing so once more. So once more, we find John apparently repeating himself. He has already dealt with this idea of being born again, being born of God several times, and yet he returns to it. But in actual practice, he is not repeating himself. He always has some particular shade of meaning, something fresh to present, some new aspect of the matter. And as we look at this verse, we shall find that he is doing so once more. Or we can look at this in another way and say that we have here, once again, one of those synopses of Christian doctrine that are such a characteristic feature of this apostle. John was very fond of stating the whole of the Christian faith in a verse. And this is not only characteristic of John, but of the entire New Testament. The Apostle Paul did the same thing. These men realized that nothing was more important than the people to whom they wrote. And therefore, Christians at all times should always be grasping the entire Christian truth. And there is no meaning, no sense in particular arguments unless they are derived from the whole body of doctrine. I emphasize all this because I believe increasingly that the main difficulty with many people today is that they are so interested in particular matters that they fail to connect them with this whole corpus of doctrine. As a result, they find themselves in trouble and in perplexity. So if we would know something about the relationship of the Christian to politics and worldly affairs, for example, the only way to do so is not to start with a particular question, but to start with the whole truth and then to draw our deduction. Therefore, the apostle, in elaborating the argument about brotherly love, incidentally reminds us of the whole truth. Now, this subject can be best divided into two main sections since John makes two main statements. The first is this: what makes us Christian is the rebirth. We must be born again. John more or less assumes this. He says, whosoever believes that Jesus the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loves him that begot loves him also that is begotten of him. Now, says John, in effect, I am anxious to demonstrate to you this question of the importance of loving the brethren. And of course, it follows quite inevitably from the doctrine of the rebirth that you know all about. However, as I have already suggested, we live in an age when we cannot make any such assumptions, so that we have to lay this down as a proposition. Indeed, as we read words like these, must not we plead guilty in general to the charge that our ideas of the Christian position are totally inadequate and insufficient? Must we not admit our failure? Indeed, I believe that most of the difficulties in this connection tend to arise from the fact that we will persist in thinking of it in terms of something that we are. Our faith, our belief, our action, our good works, instead of thinking of it in the way in which the New Testament itself puts it. To test what I'm trying to convey, let us ask ourselves some questions. What is my conception of the Christian? What is it that makes one a Christian at all? Upon what do I base my claim of being a Christian? If I am asked by somebody, you call yourself a Christian, what are your reasons for doing so? What would be my reply? Now, I am afraid that far too often we would find that our answers fall very far short of the statement that we have here in this verse. The verse that I want to show you is typical of the whole of the New Testament teaching.